The polished mahogany of the dining table reflected the chandelier's light like a dark, still lake. It was a perfect mirror for the strange smiles and carefully constructed pleasantries of the evening. Alex sat at one end, a quiet island in a sea of familial chatter. Opposite him sat his wife, Chloe, flanked by her parents, Richard and Eleanor. Her brother David was holding court, his voice a little too loud, his gestures a little too broad, as he recounted a recent triumph at his job. So I told them, you can either have it fast or you can have it right. At Aura Innovations, we only do it right, David announced, leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. The client folded, of course. They know who holds the cards. Richard beamed, raising his wineglass. That's my boy, a real shark. You'll be running that place in 5 years. The leadership there really values talent, Eleanor added, her eyes flicking momentarily toward Alex, a subtle comparison hanging unspoken in the air. Alex was an architect, a profession they considered quaint, like a blacksmith or a calligrapher. Honorable, perhaps, but not serious. Not a shark. Alex offered a small, polite smile and took a sip of water. He had designed the headquarters for Aura Innovations. He knew for a fact that the shark in front of him had nearly tanked the project David was bragging about, saved only by a more competent manager who quietly cleaned up his mess. The leadership did value talent. They just had a different assessment of where it lay. Chloe, sensing the lull in her parents' implicit judgment of her husband, felt a familiar surge of embarrassment. She saw it as her duty to manage Alex's perceived inadequacies, to smooth them over in social situations. But tonight, fueled by wine and a desperate need for her family's approval, her management took a sharper edge. "It must be so different from your world, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness that didn't quite mask the condescension. She reached across the table and patted Alex's hand. "All that pressure, all those zeros on the contracts." Alex met her gaze. His own was calm, unreadable. "It has its moments," he said quietly. Chloe laughed, a brittle, airy sound. She turned to her family, a conspiratorial gleam in her eye. "Oh, Alex is just being modest. He's perfectly happy in his own lane. We can't all be titans of industry like David." She squeezed his hand again, a little harder this time, a gesture that felt more like a warning than affection. "It's fine, darling. We all know you do your best with your little projects. It's not your fault you make minimum wage money compared to David." The phrase landed and lay there, glistening with malice on the polished wood. Minimum wage money. It was designed to sting, to diminish, to put him firmly in his place as the family's resident, humble craftsman. Richard grunted in what could have been agreement. Eleanor's lips tightened in a pitying smile. David simply looked smug. Alex felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a play. He saw the scene with perfect clarity, the four of them, united in their shared, comfortable assumptions. They saw him as a simple, good-natured man of modest means and even more modest ambition. A safe, stable, but ultimately disappointing choice for their glittering Chloe. They saw a man who earned minimum wage. He didn't correct them. He didn't argue. He simply withdrew his hand from Chloe's and let it rest for a moment on the simple, worn leather portfolio he had placed on the empty chair beside him. The leather was soft, conditioned by years of use. Inside were the foundational documents and charter for Aura Innovations, the multi-billion-dollar technology and design firm he had started from nothing 15 years ago. He was not an employee. He was the founder, the chairman, and the sole silent owner. The actual minimum wage at his company, the absolute lowest salary any full-time janitor or mailroom clerk could make, was $200,000 a year. He looked at his wife, at the woman who shared his bed, and realized with a cold, profound certainty that she didn't know him at all. And what they didn't know was that this dinner, this casual, cruel comment, was not an endpoint. It was the beginning. The quiet architect was about to draw a new blueprint, and it would change all of their lives forever. It's a story about patience, isn't it? About knowing your own worth when others try to define it for you. It's about the quiet strength that builds when you're underestimated. If you agree and you want to see how this unfolds, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We love knowing where our stories are reaching, so let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, back to that very uncomfortable dinner, where a storm was gathering behind a pair of calm, watchful eyes. Alex and Chloe had met at a gallery opening. He was there to see the work of a friend, a sculptor whose use of tension and balance he admired. Alex, in his simple, well-tailored gray suit, stood out by not trying to. He observed the art, the people, the play of light on the white walls. Chloe was a whirlwind of color and sound, moving through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace. She was drawn to his stillness. "You're either incredibly bored or you're the most interesting person in this room," she had said, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. "I'm an architect," he'd replied with a smile. "I'm just admiring the structure." He was fascinated by her energy, her vibrant ambition. She was a publicist for luxury brands, a world entirely alien to his own. She spoke of launches, of influencers, of creating a narrative around a product. He spoke of load-bearing walls, of sightlines, of creating a space that felt like home. They were opposites, and for a time, that was the appeal. Early on, he made a conscious decision. He told her he was an independent architect and a consultant for a design firm. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. He had seen how people changed when they learned of his wealth, the way their eyes would glaze over with calculation, the way conversations would subtly shift toward opportunity. He wanted, for once, to build a relationship on a foundation that had nothing to do with the Aura Innovations Tower that dominated the city skyline. He wanted to be valued for the man who sketched in notebooks and loved the smell of old books, not the man who could buy the entire bookstore. Chloe saw him as a project, a handsome, intelligent, kind man who just needed a little polishing, a little push. She loved his stability but was frustrated by his lack of overt ambition. "You could be so much more, Alex," she would say, her head on his chest in the early days. "You're brilliant. You shouldn't just be designing houses for suburban families." "I enjoy it," he would say. "Creating a home for someone is important work." She would sigh, a sound of fond exasperation. "But it's so small." Now, years later, that fond exasperation had curdled into something sharper, more like contempt. A few days after the disastrous dinner party, the topic of their annual vacation arose. Or rather, Chloe announced it. "I was thinking the Maldives this year," she said, scrolling through impossibly blue images on her tablet as they sat in their living room. The room was tastefully decorated, a testament to Alex's eye for design, but everything in it felt like it was on loan from a showroom. It was Chloe's aesthetic, clean, impressive, and slightly impersonal. "That sounds expensive," Alex said carefully, looking up from a book on Japanese joinery. "Of course it's expensive, darling. It's the Maldives." She didn't look up from her tablet. "We deserve it. I need a break from all this." All this seemed to encompass her entire comfortable life. "Chloe, we should probably look at the budget," Alex began. "A trip like that is a major expense." He intentionally kept their joint finances modest, fed by the very reasonable salary he paid himself as a consultant. It was more than enough for a comfortable life, but not enough for the casual extravagance Chloe craved. It was another test, one he was beginning to realize he had been administering for years, in which she had consistently failed. She finally put the tablet down, her face a mask of irritation. "The budget? Alex, please, don't be so tedious. My parents will help. They offered." "I don't want your parents paying for our vacation," he said, his voice even. "We're adults. We should live within our means." "Our means?" she scoffed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Your means, you mean. I have to beg my parents for a decent holiday Because my husband is content to play with his little blueprints and make pocket money. It's embarrassing, Alex. It's utterly embarrassing. The parallel was stark, the echo of the dinner party undeniable. The humiliation was no longer a public performance for her family. It was now a private one, just for him. David is taking his new girlfriend to Monaco for the Grand Prix, she continued, her voice rising. Monaco! And we can't even manage a week in the Bahamas without you bringing out a ledger like some Dickensian clerk. Do you see the difference? Do you see how it looks? He saw it perfectly. He saw a woman who measured love in airline tickets and hotel suites. He saw a woman who saw her brother's flashy, debt-fueled lifestyle as success, and her husband's quiet, profound substance as failure. Yes, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I see the difference. Inside, he was no longer just observing. He was recording. Another entry was made in the mental ledger he had started that night at the dinner table. The list of grievances was growing. The foundation of their marriage, which he had tried to build on the solid ground of mutual respect, was revealing itself to be nothing but sand. And the tide was coming in. Later that night, long after Chloe had gone to bed, angry and silent, Alex sat in his study. He opened his laptop and made a video call. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor appeared on the screen. It was Sarah Vance, the Chief Financial Officer of Aura Innovations. Everything all right, Alex? She asked. His calls at this hour were rare. Everything is fine, Sarah, he said. Just a small query. I want you to pull the travel and expense reports for David Lawson in the marketing department for the last 2 years. All of it. I want to see every hotel, every dinner, every flight. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. Is there a problem? Let's call it a difference in philosophy, Alex replied, his gaze distant. I just want to understand his definition of success. A month bled into the next, and the chill in their home became a permanent frost. The dynamic established at the dinner party became the new normal. Alex was the quiet, disappointing fixture, and Chloe and her family orbited David, the rising star. Alex found himself watching them with the dispassionate eye of an anthropologist studying a strange, self-important tribe. Their rituals were centered on status, their language a complex dialect of brand names and veiled financial boasts. The next gathering was for Richard's 70th birthday, held at the family's sprawling, ostentatiously decorated home. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. Gifts were piled on a side table, a monument to consumerism. When the time came, Richard opened his presents with performative delight. From Chloe and Alex, he received a rare, first-edition book on urban planning, a topic he'd once shown a fleeting interest in. Alex had spent weeks tracking it down. Richard glanced at it, murmured, "How thoughtful," and set it aside without a second look. Then came David's gift, a gleaming, heavy box. Richard opened it, and a hushed reverence fell over the room. It was a Rolex, a Submariner, the quintessential symbol of arrival. "David, my boy!" Richard exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion as he clasped the watch to his wrist. "You shouldn't have." The words were rote, but the pride was genuine and immense. He held up his arm for everyone to admire. A few minutes later, Richard made his way over to Alex. He was holding a small, long box wrapped in cheap paper. "Almost forgot. This is for you, Alex." Alex opened it. Inside was a set of generic, mass-produced architectural pens, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. "Saw them and thought of you," Richard said, clapping him on the shoulder with a paternalistic thud. "Something for your little hobby." The insult was so perfectly crafted, so layered with condescension, it was almost a work of art. It wasn't just a cheap gift, it was a statement. It defined Alex's life's work, his passion, as a hobby, a trivial pastime. It placed him firmly in the category of a child who needed to be placated with a small toy, while the adults handled serious matters, like admiring new watches. Alex looked at the pens, then up at his father-in-law's smiling, oblivious face. He felt a profound sense of pity for the man. Richard's world was so small, his metrics for worth so narrow, that he could hold a $20 gift next to a $20,000 one and believe he was making a statement about value, rather than just revealing his own profound blindness. "Thank you, Richard," Alex said, his voice sincere. "They're very practical." He took one of the pens from the box. It felt light and flimsy in his hand. Later, while Eleanor was loudly recounting a story she'd heard from David about an upcoming promotion at Aura, Alex sat in a quiet corner. He took out his leather-bound journal, a custom-made piece with thick, creamy paper, and used the cheap pen to make a note. The ink was thin and gray. He wrote, "Richard's birthday. The gift of perspective." The irony was lost on everyone but him. The audience, of course, would see the deeper layer. They would know that the flimsy pen in his hand was being used to sign the death warrant of a worldview. The notes he was taking weren't just a record of slights. They were the preliminary sketches for a complete demolition. The next day, the scene shifted. The quiet, muted tones of the party were replaced by the cool, clean lines of a different world. Alex stood in a vast office on the 80th floor of the Aura Innovations Tower. The city sprawled beneath him, a living map of his influence. The office was a masterpiece of minimalist design, concrete, glass, and reclaimed wood. No family photos, no personal trinkets, just a single, perfect bonsai tree on a low table. This was his real space, the one that reflected the truth of him. He was on a massive screen, deep in a video conference with his global board of directors. Here, his voice was different. It was calm, but it carried an unmistakable weight of authority. There was no hesitation, no deference. "The acquisition of the Helios portfolio is approved," he stated, his eyes scanning a series of complex financial models on a secondary screen. "But I want a full integration plan from each department head on my desk by Friday. I will not have another messy merger like the last one." The faces on the screen, powerful, respected executives from around the world, nodded in assent. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. It will be done, sir." Here he was not Alex. He was Mr. Sterling. After the main call ended, only Sarah Vance, his CFO, remained on the screen. "Is there anything else, Alex?" she asked, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Yes," he said, turning to look out the window, his gaze fixing on the distant, wealthy suburbs where Richard and Eleanor lived. "The Q3 performance reports, the ones with the executive compensation review. I want you to delay their release." "Delay them?" Sarah looked puzzled. "But the numbers are phenomenal. The board will want to see them." "They'll see them," Alex said, "just not yet. Push the internal release to the end of the month. And Sarah, make sure a preliminary, unaudited summary of departmental performance, specifically marketing, is ready by Monday. Keep it quiet, for my eyes only." Sarah's expression was a careful blank, but she understood. An order like that, so specific and so discreet, was not a simple administrative request. It was the first move in a game of chess. "Consider it done," she said. Alex ended the call and stood by the window for a long time, watching the tiny cars move along the highways below. Each one carried a person with their own story, their own ambitions, their own private pains. He had spent years trying to be one of them, to live a life unburdened by the weight of his own success. But the people he had chosen to share that life with had refused to let him. They had insisted on putting him in a box, on labeling him and filing him away. They had no idea the box was of their own making, and that he had the key. The catalyst for the coming earthquake arrived, as it so often does, not with a bang, but with the quiet failure of an arrogant man. David Lawson, the family's golden boy, and Aura's self-proclaimed shark, made a fatal error. He had been managing the Keston account, one of the firm's most important and long-standing clients. Drunk on his own perceived success and his father's endless praise, David had become complacent. He promised deliverables on an impossible timeline, dismissed the client's valid concerns with condescending bravado, and ignored the warnings of his own team. The result was inevitable. The Keston Group, after a decade of partnership, pulled their 8-figure contract. They did it quietly, professionally, with a letter addressed not to David, but to the head of his division, citing a fundamental breakdown in project management and communication. The fallout within Aura was immediate but contained. The loss was significant, but the company was more than large enough to absorb it. The real damage was to David's career. An internal investigation was launched. David, panicked and terrified of his carefully constructed image shattering, did what he always did. He deflected. At home, he was a storm of anxiety and righteous indignation. He paced the length of his parents' living room, ranting to them and to Chloe, who had rushed over to offer support. "It's the team they gave me," he fumed. "A bunch of lazy, incompetent clock watchers. And the client was completely unreasonable. They kept changing the specs. No one could have succeeded under those conditions." He conveniently omitted the part about his own hubris. Chloe, ever the loyal sister, listened with wide, sympathetic eyes. Her protective instincts flared. She saw her brilliant brother being unfairly targeted, a victim of lesser men. And her mind, conditioned by years of looking for solutions in social maneuvering, landed on a plan. "David, your direct superior is Mark Ellison, right?" she asked. "The vice president?" "Yeah," David muttered. "A corporate drone, no vision." "I'm going to invite him to dinner," Chloe declared. "Here, on Saturday. It will be a chance for you to talk to him outside the office, to smooth things over, to show him what you're really made of." Richard and Eleanor thought this was a brilliant idea. It was how their world worked. Problems weren't solved with competence. They were solved with charm, with connections, with a well-timed dinner party. When Chloe told Alex the plan, her instructions were explicit. "Now, Alex, I need you to be on your best behavior. Mark Ellison is a very important man, so please, wear the navy suit, the one I picked out. Try to look presentable. And for God's sake, don't talk about your little blueprints or an interesting brick you saw. Just smile, nod, and let me and David handle the conversation." The request to simply exist as a silent, well-dressed prop in the drama of her brother's career was the deepest cut yet. It wasn't just a dismissal of his work. It was a dismissal of his entire being. He was not a person, but an accessory, and a potentially embarrassing one at that. "I understand," he said, his voice a perfect calm that she completely misinterpreted as meek compliance. The dinner was an exquisite exercise in tension. Chloe had spared no expense. The food was catered. The wine was superb. Mark Ellison, a sharp man in his late 40s with watchful eyes, was polite but reserved. He had already seen the preliminary report on the Keston debacle. He knew exactly who was at fault. He was here out of a morbid sense of professional curiosity. David, oblivious, launched into his schmooze offensive. He laughed too loudly at Mark's non-jokes. He pontificated on industry trends. He tried to subtly blame everyone but himself for the Keston account. Mark just listened, his expression giving nothing away, which only made David try harder. Chloe, sensing the desperation in her brother's efforts, decided to intervene. She attempted to build David up by creating a contrast, and Alex, as always, was the designated counterweight. "Alex is an architect, you know," she said to Mark, as if sharing a charming but slightly sad secret. "Very creative. It's a completely different world. So peaceful. Not quite the high-stakes, high-pressure environment you and David have to navigate every day." Mark's eyes shifted to Alex for the first time with genuine interest. "An architect? That's fascinating. What kind of projects?" Before Alex could answer, Chloe jumped in. "Oh, you know, houses, renovations. He's very passionate about it." Her tone relegated his entire career to a quaint, harmless hobby. Alex said nothing. He simply met Mark's gaze for a brief second, a flicker of understanding passing between them that no one else at the table saw. Mark worked for Mr. Sterling. He had seen his face on company-wide broadcasts. He knew exactly who Alex was. The VP gave a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod and turned his attention back to his plate. The rest of the evening was a slow-motion car crash. After Mark made a polite but firm exit, the pretense of civility shattered. Chloe, her nerves frayed and her plan in ruins, whirled on Alex. "You were useless," she hissed, her face contorted with fury. "Absolutely useless. You just sat there like a lump. Mark was trying to talk to you, and you just stared at him. My brother's entire career is on the line, and what do? You sit there doodling in your little notebook. Is that all you care about? Your blueprints? Your pathetic, minimum wage life?" There it was again. The phrase. This time it wasn't a casual insult. It was a weapon, hurled with the full force of her fear and frustration. Alex slowly closed the journal he had been holding. He hadn't been doodling. He had been writing a single sentence. "It is time." The patience, cultivated over years of quiet observation and gentle tests, had finally run its course. It had not broken, it had solidified. It had transformed from a passive shield into the foundation for decisive action. He looked at his wife, at her angry, beautiful, unseeing face, and felt not anger, but a vast, tectonic sadness. The ground was shifting beneath them, and she was so busy looking at the sky she hadn't even noticed. He stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. He looked her directly in the eye, and his voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. "You're right, Chloe," he said. "It's time I stopped drawing. It's time I started to build." The week that followed was draped in an unnatural calm. Alex moved through their shared spaces with a quiet, frictionless grace. He was polite, attentive even, but distant. It was the kind of exhausted politeness one reserves for a stranger on a long flight. Chloe, steeped in the language of emotional outbursts and dramatic reconciliations, didn't know how to interpret his stillness. She mistook his silence for shame, his calm for concession. She believed he had finally understood the gravity of his failure to support her and her family. A part of her, a small, flickering ember of the woman who had first been drawn to his quiet strength, felt a pang of guilt. She had been harsh, but she quickly smothered that feeling under layers of righteous resentment. She was the one who was suffering, she told herself. She was the one burdened with a husband who lacked ambition, a brother in crisis, and the crushing weight of maintaining appearances. Her narrative was set, and his silence only served to confirm it. She didn't see him in the early hours of the morning in his study, the glow of his monitor illuminating his focused expression as he reviewed a stack of legal documents prepared by his personal attorneys. She didn't see the long, quiet video call he had with his lawyer, a man who specialized in complex, high-asset divorces. They weren't discussing battle lines or strategies for attack. They were discussing fairness, closure, and the cleanest possible separation. One evening, he sat alone in the living room, long after she had gone to bed. He swiped through the photos on his phone, a digital chronicle of their life together. A trip to Italy, before her frustration had fully bloomed. Their wedding day, her smile radiant and his own full of a hope that now felt painfully naive. A candid shot of them laughing in a park. He wasn't looking for reasons to stay. He was saying goodbye. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an amputation, a painful but necessary procedure to save himself from a spreading infection of disrespect. The next day he made a phone call, first to Richard and Eleanor, then to David. "I'd like to invite you all to dinner on Saturday evening," he said, his tone level and pleasantly formal. "At the Azure Spire. My treat. There's something important I need to discuss with the family." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The Azure Spire was not just a restaurant, it was a statement. Perched atop the city's tallest skyscraper, it was a bastion of New World wealth and power, with a months-long waiting list and a price point that made even the affluent pause. It was the kind of place David bragged about wanting to go, but had never actually been. "The Azure Spire?" Richard finally sputtered. "Well, Alex, that's quite a gesture. Did you land a big project?" "A new garage for the mayor, eh?" The attempt at his usual condescending humor was weak, undercut by genuine shock. "Something like that," Alex replied smoothly. "It's an important occasion. Please, I'd be honored if you would all join me and Chloe." When he told Chloe, her reaction was a mixture of pleasure and suspicion. The name of the restaurant was a powerful balm to her wounded pride. It was a place she could, and would, casually name-drop for weeks. But the source of the funds was a mystery. "Alex, where on earth did you get the money for this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Did you take out a loan? Is it from your parents?" "I've been saving up," he said simply, looking her directly in the eye. "It's an important occasion." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his calm face for a clue. She found none. In the end, her desire to be seen in such an exclusive venue won out over her suspicion. She chose to believe he was finally, after all these years, making a grand gesture to appease her. He was finally learning his lesson. She began to plan her outfit immediately. She had no idea she was dressing for a funeral, the death of the world as she knew it. The private dining room at the Azure Spire was called the Apex. It was aptly named. A single curved wall of floor-to-ceiling glass offered a breathtaking 180-degree view of the city lights glittering below like a scattered handful of diamonds. Directly in the center of that view, illuminated and proud, stood the unmistakable silhouette of the Aura Innovations Tower. It was a beacon, a monument to a success that was about to be made devastatingly clear. Chloe, Richard, Eleanor, and David arrived in a cloud of expensive fragrance and nervous excitement. They were dressed in their absolute finest, determined to look as though they belonged, but their forced chatter and wide-eyed gazes at the opulent surroundings betrayed their novelty. "Well, Alex," Richard said, clearing his throat as he took in the panoramic view, "you're certainly pulling out all the stops. Must be some house you're designing." Alex, who had been waiting for them, stood by the window. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, the same one he wore for his most important board meetings. He looked more at home in this temple of power than any of them. "Something like that," he repeated, his voice calm. He gestured for them to sit at the magnificent circular table. On the pristine white tablecloth, next to his own setting, sat his constant companion, the worn, unassuming leather portfolio. The meal began. A fleet of silent, efficient waiters served course after exquisite course. The food was magnificent, the wine sublime, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. Chloe, feeling the need to control the narrative, kept trying to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. "David was just telling me, the market is incredibly volatile right now," she'd say. "It takes a real genius to navigate it, doesn't it?" David, emboldened by the luxurious setting and a few glasses of vintage Bordeaux, started to regain some of his swagger. He spoke of stocks and futures, using jargon he barely understood, trying to project an air of mastery. Richard and Eleanor listened with rapturous pride. Alex ate quietly, observing. He was not angry. The anger had burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. He was a surgeon about to make a series of precise, necessary incisions. Finally, after the main courses were cleared, a hush fell. The moment had arrived. Alex placed his napkin on the table and folded his hands. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice no louder than usual, yet it commanded the absolute attention of everyone in the room. "I said I had something important to discuss, and I'd like to do that now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He began to tell a story, his tone measured and almost melancholic. "Chloe, do you remember our third date? We were walking by the river. I told you I was a consultant for a small design firm. You smiled and said you hoped I had ambition because you had enough for both of us. I thought it was charming at the time. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. She remembered. He turned his gaze to her parents. Richard, Eleanor, do you remember the first Christmas I spent with you? You sat me down in the study and asked me for my 5-year plan. I talked about creative fulfillment, about building spaces that brought people joy, and you exchanged a look, a tiny, fleeting glance of disappointment. I saw it. Richard's face began to flush. Eleanor stared at her empty plate. His eyes moved to his brother-in-law. David, you've often talked about the grunts at your company, the people earning what you call minimum wage. You've described them as clock-punching drones who just follow orders, who lack the vision to do anything more. David's smirk faltered. Finally, his gaze returned to his wife. It was not a look of anger, but of profound sorrow. And Chloe, a few weeks ago you told me I was useless. You told me I lived a pathetic minimum wage life. You were more concerned with salvaging your brother's career, a career he put in jeopardy himself, than with offering a single shred of respect to your own husband. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. He was holding up a mirror, and for the first time, they were being forced to look at their own reflections. They were stunned into silence, not by an attack, but by the quiet, devastatingly accurate recitation of their own behavior. The list of grievances had been read, not as a complaint, but as a verdict. Alex reached for the leather portfolio. The simple, worn object seemed to absorb all the light in the room. With a soft sigh of leather against linen, he opened it. The air crackled with anticipation. He slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the polished table, stopping it perfectly in front of David. David, you're worried about your job at Aura Innovations, Alex said, his voice remaining level, almost conversational. You should be. You didn't just lose the Keston account through bad luck. You lost it through a pattern of sheer, unadulterated arrogance. But your job is the least of your worries tonight. David stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. His hand trembled as he reached for it. It was an internal memorandum from Aura Innovations, printed on the official letterhead. The subject line read, Notice of Full Departmental Review and Executive Accountability Mandate, Marketing Division. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. Alex continued, his calm voice a counterpoint to the rising panic in the room. The small design firm, I've been a consultant for all these years, is Aura Innovations. A beat of silence, then another. The little projects I work on aren't houses in the suburbs. They are the company's strategic acquisitions, its global architectural footprint, its long-term vision. Aura Innovations is a privately held corporation. There are no outside shareholders. There is no public board. He paused, letting the implication build. I am the sole owner. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. Richard stared, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of disbelief. Eleanor's hand was frozen in midair, a statue of shock. David looked from the memo to Alex, his mind refusing to process the information. It was Chloe who broke the spell. She laughed. It was not a sound of humor, but of pure, hysterical denial. A short, sharp, cracking sound. Don't be ridiculous, Alex, she said, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. You? Don't be absurd. You're an architect. You draw buildings. I design them, Alex corrected her gently. His voice was soft, but it cut through her denial like a scalpel. He raised a hand and gestured out the magnificent glass wall toward the glittering city. His finger pointed directly at the brightest, tallest tower in the skyline. I designed that one, as a matter of fact, and then I built the company that fills it from the ground up. As if on cue, the polished wooden door to the private dining room swung open silently. 2 figures entered. The first was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. It was Sarah Vance, the CFO. Behind her was a man the family recognized with a jolt of horror. Mark Ellison, the vice president from the disastrous dinner party. They both walked past the family and stopped beside Alex, their posture a study in professional deference. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice crisp and clear. The formal surname echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. "The revised Q3 reports you requested, and the preliminary findings from Mr. Ellison's review." She placed a thick, bound folio on the table next to Alex's simple leather one. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. Alex nodded, not looking at the report. "Thank you, Sarah. Please, have a seat. Mark, you as well." The two executives took chairs that had been discreetly placed against the wall, their presence transforming the family dinner into a corporate tribunal. Chloe's eyes darted from Sarah's professional, impassive face to Mark's cold, knowing one, and finally to Alex. The gears of her mind were grinding, smoke pouring from the effort of reconciling two completely opposing realities: the humble, unambitious husband she pitied, and the powerful, commanding figure her brother's bosses called Mr. Sterling. The cognitive dissonance was a physical force, making her feel dizzy. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Alex, what is going on?" Alex didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on David. "The memo you're holding, David," he said, his voice devoid of heat, filled only with a chilling finality, "is the official notice that your entire department is being put under the microscope. It was triggered by the Keston failure, but as I'm sure Mark will discover, the rot goes much deeper. Mark is leading the review. It begins at 8 a.m. Monday." Mark Ellison, the man David had dismissed as a corporate drone, looked at him with the cold, impersonal gaze of an executioner. "We will be thorough," was all he said. Alex then turned his gaze upon Richard and Eleanor. The proud, condescending patriarch and his quietly judgmental wife now looked small, shrunken in their expensive clothes. "You've spent your lives obsessed with status," Alex said, his voice still quiet, yet carrying the force of a judgment. "You've been so concerned with appearances, with the make of a man's watch or the price of his car. You taught your children that a person's worth is measured by their salary and their title." He made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the opulent room, the breathtaking view, the silent, powerful executives. "So I ask you, is this enough? Is this finally impressive enough for you? Have I finally earned a seat at your table?" Eleanor looked as if she'd been struck. Richard opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed to stammer, "But why? Why wouldn't you tell us? We're family." The sadness that had been lingering in Alex's eyes for weeks finally crested. "Because I wanted to be loved for who I am," he said, his voice cracking for the first time with the weight of his deep disappointment. "Not for what I have. I wanted a partner, not a beneficiary. I wanted a family, not an audience. I conducted an experiment, and I'm afraid it failed." He finally, at long last, turned his full attention to Chloe. Her face had crumbled. The mask of arrogance was gone, shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, grasping woman beneath. The denial had given way to a dawning, sickening horror. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a private confidence in a room full of witnesses. "The minimum wage at my company, Chloe," he said, letting the words hang in the air. "The phrase you used as a slur, the absolute floor, the lowest possible starting salary for any full-time employee, from the janitorial staff to the mailroom, after bonuses and benefits, is $200,000 a year." He let that number sink into the profound silence. He let her process it. He let her understand that the insult she had thrown at him so casually was a salary her brother would have killed for. "So yes, Chloe," he continued, his voice soft as snow but heavy as stone, "in a way, you were right. I have been living a minimum wage life with you, because I have been accepting the absolute minimum level of respect. The absolute minimum of belief. The absolute minimum of love. His hand went to his portfolio one last time. He drew out another set of documents folded neatly. He didn't slide them. He placed them gently on the table in front of her. They weren't business reports. They weren't stock certificates. They were divorce papers. The sight of the documents was the final blow. Chloe's carefully constructed world didn't just crack. It vaporized. A strangled sob escaped her lips, followed by a torrent of pleading. "Alex, no!" she cried, reaching for his hand, but he pulled it back. "Please, I didn't know. I swear if you had just told me, I wouldn't have. We can fix this." "That's the point, Chloe," Alex said, his voice gentle but unyielding, the voice of a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. "It shouldn't have mattered. My telling you shouldn't have been a prerequisite for your respect. My dignity isn't an item on a balance sheet. It's not contingent on my income. I am the same man I was yesterday. The only thing that has changed is your perception of my value." David, jolted from his terror-induced paralysis by the sight of his sister's collapse, saw a desperate, last-ditch opportunity to save himself. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Alex, Mr. Sterling, sir," he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. I've been an arrogant fool. Please, what I said, it was just talk. It meant nothing." Alex looked at his brother-in-law, and for the first time there was a flicker of something other than sadness in his eyes. It was a cool, surgical pity. "Your apology is for my position, David, not for your character. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you did it to your boss. And that is a crucial distinction." He gestured toward Mark Ellison. "The review will proceed. If your work, when stripped of all its bluster and excuses, is fundamentally sound, then you have nothing to fear. If it is not, then that is a consequence of your own making. Aura Innovations values talent, but it despises incompetence masked as confidence." Richard and Eleanor were adrift in the wreckage. Their entire social and familial cosmology had been inverted. The son-in-law they had pitied and patronized was the sun around which their own tiny planet unknowingly orbited. Their son, their golden boy, was now just a disposable employee, his fate hanging by a thread. Eleanor began to weep silently. Richard just stared at the Aura Tower outside the window, as if seeing it for the first time. The monument to the son-in-law he just offered a set of cheap pens. Alex stood up, his movement signaling the definitive end of the evening, and of an entire chapter of his life. He looked at the four of them, a family shattered by the revelation of a truth they were too blind to see. "The dinner is paid for, of course," he said, his voice once again formal and distant. "I've also reserved the penthouse suite upstairs for the night if you need it, Chloe. My things are already gone from the house. You'll find it exactly as you like it." The implication was clear. The house was now just a house, no longer a home. It was hers. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday to discuss the terms of the settlement. I will be fair." With a final brief nod to the stunned group, he turned. Sarah and Mark rose in unison. Without another word, Alex walked toward the door, his two most trusted executives flanking him like a royal guard. He didn't look back. He left his wife, her family, and the ruins of his marriage sitting in the stunned, opulent silence of the most expensive restaurant in the city, with a meal that now tasted of nothing but ash and regret. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. 6 months later, the relentless passage of time had acted as a solvent, dissolving the dramatic structures of that night and precipitating the consequences into the sediment of everyday life. The scene was not a boardroom or an opulent restaurant, but a smaller, quieter space. It was Alex's original architectural studio, a place he had kept throughout his marriage, a sanctuary of drafting tables, corkboard walls, and the comforting smell of paper and graphite. Sunlight streamed through the large industrial windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Alex stood before a large drafting table, not in a suit, but in a simple linen shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was sketching, his hand moving with a fluid, joyful grace. He was designing a new public library and arts center, a project he was funding entirely himself. He looked lighter, the deep-seated sadness in his eyes replaced by a quiet, contented peace. He had orchestrated his own reversal. He had appointed Sarah Vance as the new CEO of Aura Innovations. She had the acumen, the vision, and the integrity for the role. He remained chairman of the board, his hand on the tiller, but he had stepped away from the crushing day-to-day operational demands. He had used his immense resources not to acquire more, but to buy back his most precious commodity, his time. He was an architect again, first and foremost. The lives of the others had found new, less comfortable shapes. David Lawson was not fired. Alex had insisted the review be impartial. It found what he knew it would, a core of basic competence buried under a mountain of arrogance, sloppiness, and credit-taking. He was severely reprimanded and demoted 3 levels down. He was now a junior project manager, reporting to a woman half his age who had been one of the grunts he used to mock. The humiliation was a daily grind, but stripped of his unearned status, forced to prove his worth task by task, a slow, painful change was beginning. He was learning humility, one corrected report at a time. Richard and Eleanor faced a different kind of consequence. The story of that night at the Azure Spire, in a sanitized but still devastating form, had inevitably leaked into their social circles. Their status, which had been their life's pursuit, evaporated overnight. They were no longer the parents of a rising star. They were the clueless in-laws of the magnate Alex Sterling. Their attempts to pivot, to claim a new, reflected glory from their association with him, were met with polite but firm distance from Alex's office. They were social ghosts, haunted by the memory of a prestige they had held in their hands and utterly failed to recognize. And Chloe. The divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. As he had promised, Alex was fair. He was generous. The settlement left her financially secure for life, but it was a mere fraction of the unimaginable wealth she now knew she had forfeited. She had to sell the large, impersonal house. It was too full of ghosts and too expensive to maintain. She now lived in a stylish, but much smaller apartment downtown. The greatest change was not financial, however. Stripped of her identity as a wife and social director, she had been forced to confront the vast emptiness within herself. She had taken a job, a real one, at an art gallery. She was starting from the bottom, learning about art, about commerce, about the dignity of earning her own way. One afternoon, a letter arrived at Alex's studio. It was from her. There were no excuses, no pleas for reconciliation. It was a simple, stark, and deeply honest apology. "You were right," she wrote. "I was a fool. I was so busy looking for value, I never learned how to see it. I hope one day you can forgive me, not for you, but for me. I am trying to become someone worthy of my own respect." He read it, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. It was an acknowledgement, an ending, and he had already moved on. He stood now, looking at the intricate plans for the library. He envisioned the light filling the main reading room, the quiet corners where children would discover new worlds, the gallery where local artists would have their first shows. He was building again, not for profit or for ego, but for joy. He was creating a space that would give back, a structure built on a foundation of genuine purpose. The story was never really about the money. The $200,000 minimum wage was just a number, a symbol that shattered a false reality. The real story was about worth. True worth is not a title on a business card or a number in a bank account. It is not something that can be bestowed by the applause of others or stripped away by their scorn. It is internal. It is the quiet integrity of a man who wanted to be loved for himself. It is the passion that drives you to create. It is the character you reveal not when you have power, but when you have every right to use it for revenge, and you choose fairness instead. Alex found his peace not by vanquishing his antagonists, but by releasing them. He returned to the man he had been all along, a man who found joy in the elegant solution, the perfect line, the creation of something beautiful and lasting. He had finally built a life whose foundation was unshakable, because it was a foundation he had laid himself, in silence and in secret, built not of steel and glass, but of integrity and self-respect. What do you believe is the most important measure of a person's worth? Is it their achievements, their character, or something else entirely? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found value in this story and the lessons it holds, don't forget to show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales of justice and quiet redemption. Until next time, remember to value the quiet strength within yourself and to look for it in others.